Okay. Welcome, welcome. How is everybody right now? And let's continue with the gift of Guthix. I've had my breakfast, had my coffee. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome in. Let's turn the gain up a little bit. Is that better? Okay. Yeah, that should be fine. All right. When we last left off, Gunnar had murdered his daughter's husband, sort of as vengeance for his father, and also because he suspected him of disloyalty. The Fremmenik are beginning to question Gunnar's righteous crusade against Asgarnia, showing that he does not have as firm a grip on the Fremmenik clans as he would like to believe. And, yeah. They are not too happy about being so far from their home and fighting a war that they did not want to. So, Jarl Gunnar is having trouble keeping peace and order in his ranks. At the same time, the Asgarnians are desperately in need of a cache of runes to keep their debts paid and their alliances in order. However, they are running short. And again, Asgarnians are also facing a shaky future for their kingdom. So both the Fremmenik and the Asgarnians are having issues keeping their domain in order, let's say. All right. Let's continue on with Chapter 16. The 58th year of the reign of King Radolan of Asgarnia, the 21st day of the month of Rocktuber, the northern Asgarnian frontier, which is sort of where I am at. It's a nice little view of Falador there. Ilmi stood over the remains of the mind altar, one hand on the hilt of his staff, one hand kept close to her rune pouch. The altar's remains had been swept into two great heaps, the new stone ready just beyond the circle of rune essence that marked the original position. Wind shushed through the pine forest around them, and the Kinshra encircling the site shifted, armor creaking as they watched for the goblins that lived nearby. Or a Fremmenik ambush. Any time now, Master Indel, Valzin said, standing on the edge of the circle with Ilmi. Master Indel knelt behind one of the 4 amulets positioned around the circle of rune essence, eyeing the level of the ground. In good time, High Marshal, he said. We don't want to rush this. Ilmi, move that amulet a thumb's width to the left. Don't scatter the rune essence. Ilmi started to kneel, but as she did, she tilted the staff and the blue crystal wired at the top sparked angrily. She straightened, and Master Indel pursed his mouth. I told you not to bring it. It works fine, Ilmi said. It just has some temperamentalities. If it explodes, it's not going to explode. I have seen your tests, Ilmi, and I will be very proud when the prototype is stable, but I don't think it is yet. Besides, Master Indel, the young blue wizard, Faraz, and Glenorida Let's say that. Gielinor, one of Xanamoron's newer apprentices, eyed the staff with deep suspicion. Ilmi did not know where Gunnar would send his warriors. She did not know where to send Asgarnia's troops and which of its fabled knights should lead them. She could not renegotiate a treaty, nor find new rune essence mines, nor bring the Guardian back to life. She could not solve Osiris's teleportation puzzle, nor carry the rune altar stones to where Master Indel directed. She could not stop this war. Instead, Ilmi bent her research towards a different end, a source of rune magic that didn't require individual runes. The result was the prototype staff she carried. The equations are ludicrous, Xanamoron had said, when she showed him the work she'd done to plan the staff. You're implying the energies are unlimited. They can't be unlimited. Everything eventually degrades. I understand that, but it only balances if they're unlimited, and it's making equivalent energy. Ilmi hesitated. When it doesn't explode. So where is it coming from? But that would be a problem for a different time, a different wizard. For now, it worked. Here, Ilmi held the staff out to Volzin. Could you? Don't jostle it. Volzin chuckled. Are you going to ask me not to blast anyone with it? If you see something worth blasting, do your best. No, Indel said. Don't make it explode. Ilmi crouched down and adjusted the amulet, lowering her eye to match Master Indel's. The energies had to be in close to perfect balance if they were going to lock the altar into place. She shifted so she could see the amulet to her right. That one needs to be rotated maybe 2 degrees now. Glenoyarda. No, Glenor. Geloyarda. Glenidra? These names are freaking hard. Glenoidra, could you? Glenoidra was busy hissing something to Faris, who turned red and furious under his blonde beard. Glenor. Yeah, jeez. This name is going to give me trouble as long as it shows up on the page. I'm just going to call her Glenn. Glenn, Ilmi said sharply. What's going on? The Red Order wizard shrugged, all innocence. He said he was afraid. I said, this place is eerie, Ferris said stiffly, ripe for an ambush. And I told little boy Blue not to worry. There are wizards here with actual battle skills. No, Ilmi said, as sharply as she would to Rue when she caught him trying to dig runes from her pouch. Glim startled, and, for a moment, looked so young, so guilty. We don't do that here, Ilmi said, straight up. You ride together, you fight together. I don't want to hear anything about red and blue. You're Asgarnian. Act like it. Yes, Master Ilmi, they both muttered, and fell silent. Velzen chuckled as she reclaimed the staff. You've got them scared. I don't want them scared, I want them focused, Ilmi said, scanning the trees. Forrest isn't wrong. All the more reasons to speed it up, Velzen said. After the attack on Intrana, the Asgardian forces had spread out trying to secure the rune altars that seemed most vulnerable to attack, trying to find where the Great Jarl's horde had disappeared. They reached the water altar too late to save it, sent scouts that found the nature altar shattered too. Reports flowed in from of Fremmenik ships sailing to the coasts of Menethos, and Fremmenik settlers in the wilderness to the north, and the coasts of the river Salve. Worse, they seemed to know where the Asgardians could not easily go, where their supplies and armies could not safely reach. So Radlin moved armies to guard the borders. The White Knights pressed towards the Fremmenik outposts, and the wizards went to work trying to rebuild the altars. This was the first of their attempts, Master Indel directed 2 Kintra and 2 wizards of the Grey Order to maneuver the great blocks of granite into place according to the charts he devised. The stone, Ilmi knew, didn't matter, but the shape, the cuts, the placement did. Finished? Valzen demanded when the last one was in place. 4 more Kintra abandoning their post to shift Great Altar's surface into alignment. Hardly, Indel said, standing up and dusting off the knees of his robes. Make a circle. Ilmi remembered the first time they'd repaired an altar, that day in the forest when the monstrous beasts poured. She found herself glancing up at the trees, looking for dark, many-legged shadows. As Indel directed them, stand here, switch spots, hold this. Ilmi watched the staff, trying to bend channels of magic back into spot. Suddenly, the magic caught on something. A thin whine reverberated in the space between the bones of Ilmi's face. She winced. A point above the stone altar began to glow with a faint blue light. Faris, take another step in. Excuse me. Ba ba ba. Indel said, eyes locked on the glowing spot. Don't break the circle. Valzen paced around the outside of the circle, watching with keen interest. Indel stepped forward, hand clutching a fistful of mind runes. His hand shook as he reached towards the glowing point. As if he were pushing against something physical, he crushed the runes against each other, and a glittering stream of light flowed through his fingertips. Give me one moment. I guess we are not using the GIF, the Shorts live stream. Oh well. On the other side of the circle, Valzen eyed the ribbons of rune magic with a puzzled frown. Her blue gaze flicked up to Ilmi's, brows arching as if to say, could he make it any slower? Then an arrow struck the side of her head. Valzen dropped like a dead lamb, and the Kintra all shouted orders, blowing horns to bring them all to alert. More arrows hissed through the air. Ferris whipped around, runes in his palm, and flung up a shield to cover himself. Himself and Glyn. For the Narvra, a voice bellowed. Too close, too ferocious. Ilmi's focus shrank down to a point, fear scaling her throat. No, no, no. Morana was dead. The Narvra were disbanded, and Valzen couldn't die. Unthinking, she threw a shield over Master Indel and started towards Valzen, feeling the connection of the spell strain against her. Stay where you are, Master Indel shouted over the Kintra, and the chaos. Ilmi froze. Don't break the circle. If you break it, the whole spell collapses, and the backlash will kill us. The Kintra moved like a hive of insects, directed by unspoken signals. Some swarmed Valzen, making a shield wall around her. Others slid into formation, pushing outward towards the sources of the attack. Still others formed shield walls for the wizards, but there were not enough. More arrows peppered the grove from other angles, the clash of weapons close enough to make all Ilmi's nerves scream, "Move!" Instead, Ilmi gripped the staff and rose one hand, pulling on the magic she tapped within the crystal. A blast of air streaked from her palm, but veered off, nearly striking a black knight and smashing branches from a tree. Ilmi swore. Ilmi, Indel shouted, stop. I have it, she cried back. She lowered the staff. The crystal had jostled loose, breaking free from the cage of wire she'd carefully woven around it. Ilmi jammed it down, pinched the broken wire over itself. The staff sparked up, biting her fingers, and she swore again. Beyond Glen, a group of attackers in dark leather sprinted through a gap in the Kintra's defenses. Ilmi slammed her staff onto the ground, one hand holding the crystal in place, and tunnel of wind, cold and fast, spread the center of them. The encroaching soldiers burst outward like leaves scattered before a gale. The rune altar ritual anchored her feet to the ground, pulled against her as if the threads of her nerves were tied to every other wizard there. She thought of Ardoin. She thought of the fearful people in the streets. She thought of Master Stercalis dying in the rubble, whispering each to the extent of his abilities and for the price of his sacrifices. But no, here she was. Zamorak was wrong. To the extent of their abilities, yes, but together for something greater. Protect yourself. Protect your friends, the Saradominus wisdom went. Master Stercalis' sacrifice had held back the Fremmenik while the people of Ardoin fled, protected Rue, shielded Aziris and Pariah. Rune magic seething from Master Endel's fists, the wizard held the circle, shields scattered. The staff sparked, her mouth full of the coppery taste of electricity, and as the elemental magic made a conduit of her, a tornado of power, it shot threads of lightning through her spells, the howl of a gale drowning out the cries of soldiers and Narva rebels alike. She shoved her other hand into her pouch, pulled out runes of fire and water. I gave up everything for this, she thought, as she wove another spell between the staff and the runes. You will not take it from me, or from it. Another defensive shield shattered. Another rain of arrows fell on them. Ilmi threw up her arms to protect herself, and one glazed her arm, leaving a trail of blood and searing pain. Reflexively, she let loose a firestorm that smashed into a pine tree and snapped it in half. She heard Glen cry out, turned, expecting the girl to be injured. Master Endel sagged against the altar, 2 arrows buried in his back, eyes shining with pain and grief. No, Ilmi breathed. But he held his fistful of runes close to the glowing light, hand shaking, breath hitching. Don't break the circle, he managed. No one move, she shouted, hating how her voice cracked, hating that she could only stand there, an object in this ritual, a conduit for this magic, hating that she knew there were spells that could heal him, runes that could do the work, but they had so few, and no way to replenish their stores, each to the extent of his abilities, for the price of his sacrifices. She thought, as the ritual turned to razor wires against her nerves. She wanted to scream, to weep, but the battle kept coming, the cries of "For the Narvra" still echoing, and so instead she cast and cast and cast. The last fragments of magic slid between Master Endel's shaking fingers, the spell snapped closely, like a trap closing, and the mind altar stone briefly, the whole world complete, before settling ready to be accessed. Master Endel slid from the altar to the ground, with one final gusty sigh. Ilmi, Glen, and Phyrus rushed to him. Don't pull out the arrows, Glen said, voice shaking. They say that's the worst thing you can do. But Ilmi saw at once it would not matter. Master Endel was dead. He had held the spell so no one would be harmed, and in doing so sacrificed his life. Later, Ilmi knew, she would weep. She would weep until she couldn't wring another tear from herself, and then she would find there were more. His was not the first loss she'd endured, but it struck the closest. He had seen her in what seed he had seen in her what seeds might grow if she tended them. He had not been as kind as Master Stercalis, perhaps, but he had believed there was something in her greater than a raggedy little spy. She realized she had not, after all, given up everything. The war had found more to steal away. For now she swallowed. It worked, she told him, brushing the hair from his slack face. You did it, and my staff didn't explode. 2 successful tests. The Kintra crashed down the last of the ambushers and dragged back a few survivors. Ilmi hovered over them, looking for familiar faces, family members who'd survived, but she knew none of them. She did, however, recognize the Fremmenik-style swords, thick and etched with ravens, piled at their feet. They're working with the Great Jarl? She asked one of the Kintra lieutenants. News to me, he said, but we'll certainly find out. She went to Valzen last, expecting the worst and knowing she would not be of no help if she were wrong, and she might shatter if she were right, but to her surprise, the High Marshal was awake. Her shining cap of hair sticky with blood that ran down her neck and over her face. She lay in the lap of another black knight and a young man with a needle and thread stitching shut the wound. It lodged in the bone, the man said. A lot of blood, but it didn't break through. It's fortunate itself that it didn't hit your neck or your eye, High Marshal. Thick-skulled, Valzen said, her words slurring just a bit. Heard it all my life. Any of you dead? Any of yours dead? Master and Dell, Ilmi said grimly. But the ritual's finished. He did it. Valzen sighed. I'm sorry. He was a clever man. That his enemies outflanked him is not a measure on his soul. Ilmi bit her tongue, and the Zamorakian blessing, not wanting to think about whether Master Indel, who had begun the lie that set Gunnar off, earned or did not earn his death. He had meant well, but he had not seen the paths. They said they attacked for the Narvra, she said instead, but they have Fremmenik weapons. Valzen laughed, almost manic, despite the man stitching up her head. Finally, I almost gave up. What? Ilmi frowned. What? The beauty of war, Valzen said. Your enemies flush themselves out. Can't help it. Always happens eventually. Can't wait to tell Rad. They needed to pack things up, wrap Master Indel's corpse, see to injuries. They had to go back to Falador as quickly as they could, safely. And Ilmi realized she was not the most senior able member. Ilmi realized she was the most senior, able member of the expedition. You need to rest, Ilmi said to Valzen. You have a head injury. I need to plan, Valzen murmured. Someone decided to make a very stupid mistake today. You have to make the most of that sort of thing. Alright, on to chapter 17. The 58th year of the reign of King Radalin. For the 34th day of the month of October. Fremmenik outpost, edge of the wilderness. Gunnar knelt before the Guthix stone, the rough shape of his god's fearsome face poised behind his throne. The letter crushed in one hand, its words seared into his mind as he tries to master his temper and realign himself with the goals of his god, but his thoughts kept returning to the letter, the gall of the man writing it, to the way his plans were fraying apart as if they were not the destiny laid out by the sleeping god, but only fragile mortal intentions. I need warriors, not weapons. At least 100. Radolin's Zamorakian hound survives. Timon of the Narvra, as the letter writer styled himself, epitomized everything Gunnar loathed about Asgardians, self-important, narrow-minded, convinced the world was built around him, and for the benefit of him. Even begging the Great Jarl's assistance, haughtiness bled out of his words. Did the man think Fremmenik sprung whole from the ice? If they did, Gunnar's forces would be in even greater trouble. There remained an outpost on White Woolf Mountain, but the rest were spread throughout Gielinor to begin to better strike the rune altars and keep the Asgardians moving. They would believe the Fremmenik were stuck in their ways, knew only the ice and the sea and the beasts of the north, But as they traveled and built and won over the people who Asgardian's ambitions had left behind, they saw the Fremmenik's true great advantage. They were survivors. They would last long beyond this. They would succeed. Rattlin's Zamorakian hound survives. One task, one simple task. Assassinate the High Marshal. Gunnar gave them the location, the expected numbers of Black Knights, the means to buy the goblins' inattention. And what? The Green Order Master is dead. That Master in Dell had been killed was a poor consolation. The man had been the source of the lie that compromised Viljar and played the Wolf clan as fools. But he was an old man, and if his death elevated Ilmi, then it had come out of its proper place and time. It was beginning, he reminded himself. A sickness that would eat Asgardia from the inside out. The Narvra weren't the only ones resentful of their king's unusual rule. Rebellions brewed in all corners of the country. Only one had to take hold. We have reports one of the Green Wizards now wielded a terrible weapon, a staff that casts spells of wind without the use of runes. Ilmi, he felt certain it was hers with the staff, her making him look foolish. Some ancient part of Gunnar remembered wanting this for her, wanting her to be able to protect herself. That small, decaying part lit up, glad she was alive. But the greater part of him simply wished her gone, and whatever light remained, it only ignited his anger. Indel may have created the lie, but Ilmi had made it personal. Ilmi had colluded with Zoria, and then killed Zoria with her foul magic. Gunnar had achieved something no mere Jarl could have dreamed of, and yet, for all their successes, his people craved a season of rest. His goal was too enormous for them to hold with their own thoughts, and if he sent them out to be nothing more than mercenaries for the Narvra and their fellow malcontents, then he could only blame himself. Where he found more Alvises muttering about his downfall. And there were more traitors, he was certain of that. More Fremmenik wondering when they'd return home, when they would go back to the sea and the ice. More bands of warriors that seemed to vanish even as he brought replacements from the clans in their homelands. What did any of the Fremmenik care about Asgardian politics? About Zamorak and Saradomin? About which treaties were weak and which were symbolic? Gunnar had spent the last winter trying to root out the sources of these doubts. It led in circles, no one admitting to hearing anything, no one admitting to repeating it. He needed his warriors, his people, his horde. He needed their loyalty. If the doubts grew, if they became prone to war, fatigue, and disbelief, then his great goal of destroying rune magic would fail. They have repaired the mind altar, you said, was permanently destroyed. The letter read, You should guard the other ruins if you wish them to remain that way. Gunnar did not have the warriors to guard every shattered altar, even destroyed passage. He had his wits and his understanding of the web that linked these fractious southern nations together. He could topple Asgardia if he pulled the right strings, he was sure, so long as no one toppled him first. Guthix, Gunnar prayed. When you stir, gods tremble. Where you walk, bounty blooms. You have raised mountains and leashed demons. You have shown me the error of our ways and the path to salvation. Do not abandon me in this place at this time. Only silence answered, as befit the sleeping god. For the first time in a long time, he wished Freya were here. She would have listened, would have soothed his worries, but no, what he needed was someone to solve his problems, to point to the weak part he couldn't see. And that hadn't been Freya's strength. It had been Ilmi's, and that had been a lie. You don't need anyone, he told himself. The Great Jarl stands alone. Footsteps approached. Great Jarl? Gunnar straightened at the interruption, but did not turn. I'm busy, Froynia. You said, she began. You said to tell you if we found anyone trying to leave, anyone spreading rumors or dissatisfaction with your cause. Gunnar looked at Froynia and had a streak of gray in his... Froynia had streaks of gray in his beard, in her braids. Now, deep lines in her cheeks, but she was loyal as a retainer. She was loyal a retainer as he could have asked for, and a fierce warrior still. She looked afraid beside her. Jesper, a younger warrior with reddish beard, looked as though he might run. What happened? Gunnar demanded. You're not going to like it, Froynia said. He stood. What happened? Your daughter, Great Jarl, Jesper said, all in a rush, and for a moment Gunnar panicked, imagining Thyra hurt, Thyra dead. But Froynia said, She stole supplies. She had letters from the others' outposts. We think she's heading to Relica, but she won't tell us anything. She hesitated. We took the children back to the Longhouse, but she's locked in the smokehouse. We keep it quiet, Jesper said. What do you want to do? A sickness that eats from the inside out, Gunnar thought. A dozen tiny rebellions, but no, every part of him turned against the thought. They were wrong. Thyra wouldn't hurt him this way. Who sent her out of the settlement, he demanded. She won't talk to us, Froynia said. Fine, Gunnar thought. Thyra would talk to him. He would sort all of it out. Thyra sat in the center of the cold smokehouse, her legs folded under her, her hands tied behind her back. The smell of fires baked into the wall. After only a season hung dense and greasy in the air. A bright bruise marked her left cheekbone, and her pale braid was coming loose. She looked up at him, only exhaustion in her eyes, and in that moment she seemed so small, and all his rage was for her captors. Who hit her? He demanded. Jesper held up his hands. It was an accident, Great Jarl. She didn't want to come with us, Froynia said. Of course she didn't, Gunnar said. She's done nothing wrong. I gave you the task of the utmost importance, and you bring me my daughter? How could you think she was fleeing? How could you think... Because she was. Thyra's voice stopped him like an axe to the chest. Froynia and Jesper looked away as she turned her face. No, you weren't, he said firmly. We're not discussing you going for a walk beyond the outpost. They think we're... Leaving, Thyra said. Her pointed chin raised, leaving for Relica. Leaving to find a ship to the Salmon clan. Gunnar stared at her. What has Ovar been telling... Jarl Ovar hasn't sent a word to me since we left, Thyra said. As if she weren't tied up. As if she weren't his daughter. I don't want to be here. I don't want to watch you burn the world. I don't want to see what happens when everything crashes down on us. And I'm not alone in that, Father. She'd always been stubborn, even as a little girl. How many times had she gone tromping out into the meadows to pick flowers when there was work to be done? How many times had she tested his patience, refusing to come when called? But these were minor flaws, not betrayals. This is the will of Guthix, Gunnar began, off balance. This is the will of Gunnar, she said. You're hurt, and you're angry, and you want to make something of it. But this has gone too far. How many people have died? How many people are going to die? As many as it takes, Gunnar shouted. This isn't about you or me. This is about the safety of the world. The will of Guthix. Everything Zoria warned about. Do you think Zoria would have wanted this? She shouted. Do you think any of this is what he meant? Zoria, laughing, avuncular. Zoria, laughing, avuncular, delighted at all their stumbling steps into the future. Zoria admitting to the lie, uncaring about the lie. Zoria dead, with Gunnar's axe buried in his skull. I was willing to hear you, Thyra went on. I was willing to believe you were still a good man, a good Jarl. You talked of settling and colonies, and you abandoned the outpost at Erdoin. We are not settlers. We are an army marching to our deaths, pretending as a future. When did you turn on me? He murmured. When Alvis died. Thyra looked up at him grimly. When you killed him? Alvis wasn't the one questioning your methods. He only envied your power. I was the one asking how best to turn your destiny. No one will turn my destiny, Gunnar snarled. I will destroy the rune altars, and then I will crush Falador and take back the rune essence they stole. She set her jaw. They're repairing them. They're catching up. Would Guthix allow that? Strike her, kill her, make her pay. He turned away, shocked at the urge to harm Thyra. For a moment Gunnar could only think of Ott's execution, of his brother bound and on his knees waiting for the axe, of Viljar standing there just watching. Had his father grieved? Had he seen in Ott the little boy who once trailed after his father? I am not my father, Gunnar thought. I am the Great Jarl. Then I will break open their city and destroy their rune essence first. They will watch with ashes in their mouths as I wipe rune magic from Gielinor, he said coldly. Untie her, he said to Fronya. Fronya and Jesper exchanged looks, but the older warrior went to remove the bonds. She pulled Thyra to her feet, and Gunnar forced himself to face his daughter. He was the Great Jarl, after all. He could be more generous than Jarl Viljar. But he could not brook betrayal. You are no daughter of mine, he said roughly. You will leave this place as you are right now. You will never return. If any of the Wolf clan or any of the clans that give me fealty meet you, they will be sworn to shun you, and if you speak a word against them or me, they will kill you on sight. Thyra blinked at him. We are in the wilderness, she said. You have to give me a weapon. You will leave this place, he repeated. You will never return. You will thank me for my mercy. My children, my heirs, he corrected, remain here. Here at last he seemed to wound her. You can't. I am the Great Jarl, he said. I do as I wish. No, she said frantically, finally afraid. No. He nodded to Fronya. Escort her out to the gate, and make clear to all she is no longer Fremmenik. Father, Gunnar ignored her, wrapping his heart in ice. I want a list of her conspirators, those who wrote these letters from the other outposts. When we march on Falador, there will be no doubters in my ranks. Those, he thought, as he left the smokehouse, and Thyra screams. He did not need to be so generous with. Alright. I think that's about going to do it today. Thank you everybody who stopped by and watched. Again, this is going in the playlist, so if you want to listen to what I've read so far, you can go ahead and listen to that. And